So to start off, what is a hackamore actually, and when do you typically use it? So hackamore is a type of a bitless bridle. Most of the time when people talk about hackamore, they think of one that has at least a tiny bit of leverage. Some bitless configurations like a side pull, which kind of comes from here and just almost works like a halter, is typically not called a hackamore. There is the bosal, which is a type of sort of like almost like a cane that's wrapped around the horse's muzzle, and then a rein is attached, and that is typically called a hackamore. But that is, I think, the only example of a hackamore or a type of a bridle setup that people refer to as hackamore that I can think of, which is actually not with leverage. So most of them will typically have some sort of leverage. And what do I mean by that? So the principle there is that as you engage the reins, the rein would attach here. You will see that the hardware of the hackamore, which is this metal part, rotates, and so it applies pressure on the pole. As you can see, this part moves down, and this part sort of rotates to apply pressure on the top of the nasal bone, and then this part rotates up, so it applies pressure on the chin. So as a result, the horse will experience pressure here, and on top of the pole. Now, most hackamores work this way. The strength of the signal is not direct, meaning that it's amplified because of the leverage part. So if there's a what we call a purchase, so basically the part where the signal is delivered typically, or the bit sits, and it attaches above the bridle, and then there's also a lower shank, then typically it will lead to a sort of leverage applied, if that makes sense. And the longer the shank, or the difference between this part and this part, the more leverage it applies. So this hackamore is very mild. It doesn't apply a lot of pressure, but hackamores with longer shanks will apply even more pressure. So it's very, very important that we know how to fit them correctly, because if they apply pressure on the wrong spots, then this pressure, as it gets amplified, could hurt the horse and sometimes lead to injury, which we obviously want to avoid. So we currently do not sell very long hackamores. I believe this is actually the longest that we currently sell. We do plan on introducing some, so maybe at the time of this video being published, there already are some options on our website that are a bit longer, but generally we like to keep the bits that we sell quite mild, as we find that a lot of riders are actually looking for more gentle options. But anyways, if we're going to talk about hackamores, it's really important that we discuss also the types of situations in which it makes sense to use one. So a classic example of this would be when a horse doesn't really like to go in a bit, which can happen. Some horses don't like anything in their mouths. Other horses have injuries. Sometimes the horses just started in a bitless setup, and you end up just going with it, and there are no complaints, and you don't need the aids that a bit offers, and it's working. So why fix something that's not broken, right? So people will typically choose hackamore on the basis of their need, or even sometimes a discipline. You see hackamore is more frequently used in endurance, because they ride for really long hours, or cross country, because it gives, for some horses certainly, much better brakes in very fast speed situations, or even show jumping. Sometimes you see them in combination with the bits. It looks like a scary setup, but the idea is basically you have a bit, and then you have a hackamore that sort of extends all over kind of the bit space. And the reason why people use it, even though it looks like a lot of hardware on the horse's face, it's actually quite a kind option, because the rider tends to use the hackamore for kind of like backward brake type of a motion, and the bit for the lateral control. Most hackamores are not very good at lateral control because you know, once you turn the horse, it's a bit of a blunt instrument. It's good for like compressing this part, but it's not always very good at kind of moving the horse's face from side to side, which is kind of where bits tend to be overall better. So if you have more arguments bringing the horse back rather than moving it to the side, and your horse goes really well off the cues of your body from side to side, then Hackamore might actually be a pretty good option, because I find that horses that can be a bit unsettled in speed situations, when you bring them back very fast with a bit and they have more sensitive mouth structures, do really well in a Hackamore. So this could be your horse there, or you just want to ride bitless because you want to graze your horse while you're hacking, and so on and so forth. So lots of many different applications. Now going to what I just spoke about, you know, the fact that you need to fit it correctly. There are just a few principles, and actually it might look a bit confusing because there aren't that many riders that necessarily ride in Hackamore day in and day out, so this knowledge is not very common, but it's quick to learn, and there are just a few principles you want to apply. So first of all, at least we sell the hardware and the noseband separately. You can buy different kinds of nosebands. This one is called a fancy stitch one, so this is padded. We also have a sheepskin one. It really depends how your horse is and what they prefer. We find that this one's a bit more stable than the sheepskin, but the sheepskin's more soft and more adjustable, so it depends, again, what you want and what you need. And the way you want to fix it is you want to be able to put at least 2 fingers like that underneath, but you also don't want it too loosey-goosey, because then it's going to start shifting like this, and we don't want that, right? Because then you kind of lose the aids and the horse gets confused. So it's a bit of a delicate balance to make sure that it's tightened appropriately, but generally speaking, you don't want it super tight, because remember, it's going to compress further once you engage it, right? So you definitely want to leave some slack, but you also don't want it so loose that it starts shifting around, and then the signal gets lost in translation. 2 fingers is generally a really good place to start, and you can adjust up or down depending on how your horse reacts. The more important part that a lot of people don't always get right is the height of the Hackamore. So this one's adjusted roughly properly, and I'll just walk you through the guideposts to what I think is important here. So the area for the noseband and Hackamore by extension is actually quite small. We definitely don't want it too low, because this is where the nasal bone goes, and this part's actually quite fragile. You can see it even moves a little bit, and we don't want that to get broken or injured. And you know, as you see, the bone there is very thin, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. There have been reports, so please do not hike it all the way down where the bit would typically sit. This will not be comfortable for the horse, and it could potentially be even unsafe. Then you obviously don't want it too high, because you don't want it to interfere with this facial crest structure. So when the reins are engaged, you want to make sure that there's ample room. So you see there's about a finger's worth of room for the shank to rotate without interfering with this facial structure. And the other thing to watch out there is that there's this opening that is not actually visible on the horse's face, which is why it's nice to demonstrate on the skull. But this is where a lot of nerves and blood vessels pass through. So you don't want this to be covered with anything or experience too much pressure, because it will compress the horse's face, and it's not a pleasant sensation. Just like if you think about where sometimes you can feel a nerve pinched or something, it's just very, very unpleasant. So we generally want it actually roughly about 2 fingers down from the facial crest is probably the right space. And the kind of the final guidepost is the nasal bone kind of ridge over here, because this is where the airways pass through. So you can actually feel this out. You can find this gap with your hand if you just kind of go up the nasal bone, you'll feel you'll hit a bone. So you definitely want the nose band above that, because if you tighten it around here, it's gonna impact your horse's ability to breathe. And especially if you're going to do stuff like cross country and any other speed situations, you want your horse to have as much oxygen as possible, so you don't want any sort of obstruction on the airways. And so that's a really nice and useful guidepost. Generally, I like to actually feel it out over here and position the nose band just above this part, so I know that I'm below this, but also above the airways. So that's kind of roughly it. Some other things that are probably worth mentioning but are not specific to Hackamore bridles is that we want this to be a straight line, so we don't want to over tighten this specific buckle. And we want the buckles on the eye level, because once it gets close to TMJ, you are going to potentially create problems and tension around that three-dimensional joint that is so important for horses' relaxation and overall performance. So yeah, that's actually not a very complicated and difficult to adjust piece of tack, but you just need to know these quick principles. So don't obstruct the airways, definitely don't bring it too low, and don't bring it too high up either, because it might just put pressures on nerves, right? One last final piece that I nearly forgot is that we don't want to over tighten this for another reason. There's a lot of blood vessels passing through over here. So if you put a lot of pressure over here, you will find that, again, the performance might get compromised, because there's just a lot that happens over here, and it is a sort of a sensitive spot for your horse. So generally, the best way to think about it is that if this line stays straight, you're probably on the right track, because this is not over tightened. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope this is helpful for you, and it will make your experience with the Hackamore bridle a little more smooth.